Welcome, and thank you all for coming to this meeting where we have gathered to assess and address the development challenges of the Republic of Macedonia. My name is Nela Mrčkovska, and I have prepared the material that I'm about to present. I have decided to start the meeting off by providing a presentation where I will highlight some of the observations and findings I have done through my extensive research and presence in the country. This presentation will first provide a quick background of the country. I'm aware that you, as members of the Macedonian government, are knowledgeable of the facts I will present in the background slide. However, I thought it was essential that I highlight some facts that can be said to be contributory to some of the development challenges of Macedonia. Following the background slide, I will present several slides with statistics that will encompass economic, political, and social indicators. Finally, the slides following the statistics are slides that include the theoretical perspective and concepts I find the most useful in addressing the development challenges of Macedonia. These slides also include several strategies, approaches, and key actors from the international field that can aid in the said strategies. I will conclude the presentation with some overarching remarks from the analysis. Macedonia is a landlocked country in southeastern Europe. Macedonia's location is important for several reasons. Lack of access to its own ports makes the country dependent on other countries for import and export transit. Additionally, its strategic location in the Balkans has been a motivation for many outside interests being involved in the country, as history has shown us. The size of the country is relatively small. With 9,928 square miles of land, Macedonia is 146th out of 196 countries in relation to its size. It's important to keep the size of the country in perspective as we later look at the magnitude of GDP and other indicators. Despite the size of its territory, Macedonia is not extremely populated. With its 2,072,409 inhabitants, the population density is relatively reasonable. Finally, one other important fact is that despite the long history of Macedonia, Macedonia in its current form and function has only existed since 1991 after the breakup of Yugoslavia. Therefore, it is essential that we recognize the challenges that come with the development of a young country. Compared to other countries, Macedonia is regarded as developing or less developed country of southern Europe. Keeping these factors in mind, I will now present some statistics used in assessing the development status of Macedonia. In order to be able to capture the contributory indicators to the development status of Macedonia as a whole, I consider economic, political, and social indicators. First, I present general economic indicators. Macedonia's GDP is 10.9 billion American dollars, and this number is $5,223 taken as GDP per capita and $13,055 when the number is calculating at purchasing power parity. The GDP annual growth is at 1.2% after a drastic decrease since 2016 and 2017. Before the 2016-2017 decline in GDP growth, the rate was increasing and steady over time. The inflation rate is 1.6%, which is relatively stable over time and comparable to the rates of economies alike Macedonia's. The interest rate stands at 3.25%, which has been a pretty steady number over the years, although it is relatively high for the region and related economies. The government debt to GDP is 38.7%, which is relatively low when compared to similar economies. Taking in consideration the Greek financial crisis could have had detrimental results on proximate economies, Macedonia managed to regulate its economy to a point where it still managed the government debt well. The government budget is negative 2.6% of GDP, which is comparable to OECD countries. Taking in consideration that one of Macedonia's major goals after the independence was utilizing free trade as part of its economic reforms and regional integration, it is essential that we also observe how the trade indicators are performing. Looking at the balance of trade, we can note that Macedonia is experiencing a trade deficit of negative $144.5 million, which is relatively high when compared to other alike economies. The fact that the magnitude of imports remains steady over time, but exports are fluctuating, attributes to this phenomenon. However, there is a continuous, although slow, increase of imports, which exports, which gives some hope for decreasing the trade deficit in the future. Unfortunately, the magnitude of foreign direct investment has significantly decreased in recent years. The Macedonian market was given a lot of confidence by investors in the early 2000s. However, the political crisis, as well as the proximity to the Greek financial crisis, has deterred investors from reaching out to the Macedonian market. On a positive note, however, the tourist arrival has increased over time as Macedonia and the wider Balkan region have become a point of interest for tourists from around the world. As such, tourism has become a significant part of the Macedonian economy. Now that we have looked at some of the relevant economic indicators, I would like to take a look at political indicators. Unfortunately, Macedonia is often cited to have issues with corruption in a number of measurements and indices. According to the Corruption Perception Index, Macedonia's index is 35 out of 100, which is below the average index for corruption worldwide. That index places Macedonia as 107 out of 180 countries, increasing in perceived corruption from 62 to 107 since 2010. Another index where Macedonia has experienced a worsening is in its Global Peace Index. Due to recent tensions and crises, Macedonia has dropped from 95th to 102nd place on the Global Peace Index out of 163 countries. The World Press Freedom Index and the Rule of Law Index also reveal issues in this regard, as Macedonia places 109th out of 180 countries on the World Press Freedom Index and 57th out of 113 countries on the Rule of Law Index. In both cases, Macedonia's index is comparable to other countries in the region, but significantly worse when compared to developed countries from Western and Central Europe. Last, but certainly not least, I would like for us to look at social indicators, which are extremely important for the determination of a country's development status, as the social indicators measure the well-being of a country's society. One of the most staggering indicators on this slide is perhaps the statistics that 30.4% of the population still lives under the poverty line. Based on this, it is somewhat surprising that the Gini coefficient is as low as 35.6, which is comparable to developed countries in Europe. From my observation, I think this somewhat low Gini index can be attributed to the extraordinarily large middle class in Macedonia. The unemployment rate is also remarkably high. Although the unemployment rate has significantly decreased from close to 40% in 2008, it is still a rather high figure. This unemployment rate is even higher when we consider a subset of the population, the young people. The youth unemployment rate is staggering 50.1%. On top of that, the employment rate in Macedonia is only 44%, making it a country with the third lowest employment rate in Europe. It is perhaps not a surprise when we look at the immigration rates. 24.8% of the population is currently living abroad, which makes Macedonia the country with the third largest percentage of immigrants in Europe. Based on the employment situation, it is also perhaps not a surprise that reports show that 72% of the Macedonians are not satisfied with their financial situation. Furthermore, Macedonia places 146th out of 178 countries in regards to its people life satisfaction, with the 178th country being a country with the least satisfied people. Looking at the Human Development Index, it seems that Macedonia has been climbing the ladder in this regard. Taking in consideration the high literacy rate in Macedonia and the somewhat low infant mortality rate, as well as the comparable life expectancy age, it's not a surprise that Macedonia scores well on the HDI. However, it seems that once we take a look beyond the basic needs or freedoms, as the well-being score shows us, Macedonian people are among the lowest in Europe in regard to their well-being. Taking all of the above statistics, economic, political, and social, in consideration, we can establish the following. For the most part, the economic indicators confirm Macedonia to be named one of the best reformatory states per the World Bank. Even though recent political crises have harmed this progress, the majority of the indicators are promising in regard to Macedonia's economic growth. The economic center proved to be well performing and well managed, especially when we consider the challenges it has faced during the past 10 years, from the Greek financial crisis to the many political crises in the past few years. We note slow but steady economic growth. However, once we consider the political indicators, the situation unfortunately gets a little bit less promising. The high corruption index and the number of political crises, ethnic tensions, and instabilities in the rule of law sector makes for a worsening and unstable political situation. On the societal level, this political crisis increase the ethnic tensions between people, as very often ethnic cleavages are used for political gains, making it less likely for the government to address the said tensions. I see the biggest concerns when considering the social indicators. The social situation seems rather stagnant and unsatisfactory according to the majority of the indicators. While it seems that the basic freedoms such as access to education and health are satisfactory, Macedonia still experiences high poverty rates, high unemployment, and especially high youth unemployment, high brain drain, low financial and life satisfaction, as well as low recorded well-being of Macedonian citizens. In most of these categories, Macedonia was placed as one of the worst performing countries in Europe, if not wider. Therefore, a special focus needs to be given to the social situation of the Macedonian people. I find this, once again, to be of the biggest concern to Macedonia's development status. Therefore, the suggestions I provide next as part of the recommendation for Macedonia's improvement of its development status, I pay special attention to the social issues in the country. To address aspects of the development challenges that Macedonia is facing, I propose utilizing critical modernism as a theoretical perspective. In the next few slides, I present the rationale behind utilizing this perspective and highlight some concepts of the theory that I find that can be applied to the Macedonian situation. To start off, I wanted to provide the founding ideology behind critical modernism. Critical modernism as a perspective emerges as an alternative to the Keynesian policy regime and the neoliberalist monetarist economics. Both of these approaches proposed and implemented policies that were meant to achieve economic growth. However, the results from the policy's implementation revealed that economic growth poorly indicated whether or not development is happening. Based on the evidence of what these approaches achieved and what they failed at, critical modernism emerged as a response to these two alternatives. Critical modernism approaches modernity as a form of capitalist practice where economic growth is desired and respected. However, the capitalist practice is achieved and guided mainly by social relations, instead of political economic elites as is in the case of the previous above-mentioned approaches. Therefore, one key point to remember here is the role of social relations as part of the development process. Here I present in more detail what this approach mainly argues, or in other words, what are the concepts that this approach is guided by. The first concept I have listed here is the social and democratic control of economic progress. Critical modernists argue that in order for economic progress to be achieved and to be sustained, there needs to be a participation from the society as a whole. And that participation is only achieved when there is a democratic process where everyone has a say in the process. By doing so, we can achieve an inclusion of the broader society and represent the needs of the broader society in the process of development. That leads me to the next point, which is involvement of the broader social strata will allow for the needs of the underprivileged majority to be placed above those of the privileged minority. In the case of Macedonia, the fact that the economic growth the country has experienced has not reached the deeper levels of society, as portrayed in the high magnitude of poverty and unemployment rates, points to the underrepresentation of those that are underprivileged. In order for these levels in the society to be heard and for their needs to be addressed too, we need broad popular participation of electorates and social movements. Once the underprivileged mass of people is heard and accounted for in elections and in the development process, their needs are likely to be met, opposite of what elites with no such struggles can achieve or account for. Additionally, there's an important concept that needs to be mentioned here. Giving power to the social relations, social movements, and the broader society will allow for one society to develop with its own cultural, historical, and peculiar context. Moreover, one other concept of critical modernism not to be forgotten is the fact that the scientific and technological advances of the capitalist system are certainly valuable and beneficial, and as such, as a society they should be encouraged and utilized. However, they need to be utilized in a way that benefits the broader society instead of benefiting a privileged minority. Keeping these arguments and concepts in mind, I would now like to consider how would Macedonia benefit from this approach given the development status and the indicators that we observed at the beginning of this presentation. As the indicators at the beginning of this presentation suggested, the economic growth that Macedonia has experienced since its independence has not been felt by many levels of the society. While the government and the political elite have failed to effectively manage funds that were perhaps a product of this growth, the society as a whole has suffered due to this omission. Therefore, in order to address this, we need to empower the underprivileged to find their voice through participating in the decision making of the development policies in the country and to empower individuals to employ their skills and be part of the development practices. As perhaps some of you are aware, Macedonia has been praised many times by National Geographic and other prominent traveling magazines and organizations for its authentic cuisine, peculiar traditions, and noteworthy culture. There are many Macedonian people who present this aspect of the country. A lot of family businesses cook traditional dishes and utilize little known culinary recipes. There are many craftsmen who have extraordinary skills in wood and stone embellishments. There's folklore in clothing and music performed by local artists. These are just a few examples of the people whose skills are not fully employed and whose voices are not empowered. Considering these peculiarities, this aspect of Macedonia can be the country's competitive advantage over the other highly industrialized and mechanized countries. Only by giving voice and empowering people like the above mentioned can one collectively arouse development from the roots. By doing so, you will also widen participation in the economic process, and by doing so, people will gain more accountability and actively participating in sustaining that economic progress. Finally, going along with the utilization of the technological and scientific advances that critical modernists give high appreciation, it is noteworthy that Macedonia is known to have some educated young people in the electrical engineering sector. Macedonia was also the first country to become wireless and to have full access to broadband internet. This was also evident in 2016 when there were worldwide news of the Macedonia serving as a hub for young people to collectively create and spread fake news. Although ethically, this event was certainly not justifiable, it shows that Macedonian young people have the abilities to advance in the technological and scientific sector. However, they're not being employed in an effective and ethical manner. The development process will benefit from educated and technological savvy individuals, which Macedonia clearly possesses. Finally, how can Macedonia achieve the aforementioned? I propose four ways in which Macedonia can advance in employing the concepts of critical modernism and the strategies I outlined previously. First and foremost, I believe that the Macedonian society can benefit tremendously by enriching its civil society with NGOs, IGOs, and private foundations. We know that these three actors are essential in international development as they indirectly shape the policies with their guidance, mentorship, experience, and financial help. Even though Macedonia is not a primary candidate for these organizations addressing lack of basic freedoms and necessity, there's still a large percentage of the population that lives under the line that could use the financial help from these organizations. But no moreover, and perhaps more applicable in the Macedonian case, is the mentorship and guidance that these organizations can offer to the Macedonian society. As we learned, the purpose of these organizations has evolved in recent years. The purpose is no longer as much providing outside expertise that's perhaps out of touch with the necessities and cultural context of the countries they serve, but their purpose is empowering individuals from the local population. One way of doing so is empowering individuals by helping them establish social entrepreneurship. Therefore, it's essential that these actors assist in providing access to social entrepreneurship in Macedonia. The unemployed young but skilled and educated force in Macedonia certainly has the motivations to engage in such businesses that benefit both themselves and the society as a whole. At the same time, these young people and their social entrepreneurships can take advantage of the cultural craftsmanship and promote this uniqueness with their businesses. Finally, I find the diaspora to be a valuable actor in development. Taking in consideration that almost 25% of the Macedonian population lives abroad, I believe that these people have perhaps gained experience, education, and potentially even a financial mind to help social entrepreneurs in their native Macedonia. Despite these people living outside of Macedonia, I would argue that many still deeply care about the well being of their countrymen. Therefore, organizations from the diaspora can be a kind of international organization that put confidence and help social entrepreneurships develop in Macedonia. To conclude, this presentation attempted to provide an overarching account of the development status of Macedonia. After providing statistics, I discovered that, despite the somewhat satisfying economic indicators, Macedonian society is rather deprived based on the social indicators. In order for Macedonia to be able to improve its society, there needs to be a commitment by the political elite to set aside its interests and gains and provide resources for the needs and voices of the underprivileged majority to be heard. As it was argued in this presentation, there needs to be a democratic participation and engagement of all social groups in order for the society to prosper. Finally, the country needs to take advantage of its rich history, cultural, and natural beauties and entrust them in people that have been a part of them to promote and cherish them. However, they can only achieve that if they're empowered and enabled to do so. I hope that with this presentation I was able to provide some insight into where the country's development effort should be geared. I thank you for your attention. If there are any questions regarding information on this presentation, please feel free to contact me at nela.marchkovska@ou.edu.